Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from our next guest, I am sure that you will agree that she deserves the moniker of interesting person. Saving America welcomes Dr. Catherine Schein, who is a world-class scientist, and I'm proud to share with my Saving America audience that she is my sister. She earned her Bachelor of Science at the University of Pennsylvania with honors. She then earned her master's in bioengineering from MIT. She was offered a fellowship to the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, where she earned her PhD in microbial technology. She then worked at a biotechnology leader, Biogen, in Switzerland. She created one of the first processes for something known as recombinant protein production, which means making proteins that were genetically cloned, working on alpha interferon and other cytokines. She later returned to academic research, researching allergies, working on useful vaccines, and determining what makes proteins toxic. That's included such critical work as looking at chemicals that could prevent or reverse the aggregation of protein in Alzheimer's disease. She and her husband later moved to the United States, where they both worked at the University of Texas Medical Center at Galveston. She's a heavily cited author who continues to work on protein allergies and viruses. In the United States, we have a problem with not enough of our young people interested in math and the sciences. Dr. Schein has helped to bring an aspect of advanced medical science to the public with her new book, Conditionally Toxic Proteins. Now, before you change the channel, listen for a few minutes to help you see how connected we are all to this topic. We welcome Dr. Catherine Schein for her first appearance on Saving America. Most of us assume that protein is something all us humans need to survive. What is this about proteins being toxic?
Well, as I point out in the first chapter, just about anything can be toxic, but we've made a lot of advances in protein science in the last 50 years or so, and it's now possible to treat people with things called cytokines, which are small proteins produced by the body that have a lot of different activities. For example, interferon, which is, of course, my great love. It was my introduction to the field of protein chemistry. Before that, I'd mostly worked with a much larger protein called hemoglobin, which is the red in your red blood cells. So, and I have, when I started, I think you might remember this, my mother used to drive me to Norfolk General Hospital to the blood lab there for my senior thesis, which eventually won a Westinghouse Prize, a Virginia Westinghouse Prize. Of course, that prize has changed a lot in name over the years. I think it's now, I know it was at some point the Intel National Science Prize, but it's, anyway. But that, of course, was just for the state of Virginia. So I've always been interested in how proteins behave, and working at Biogen back in the very early days was, of course, very exciting because we got to make interferon. And at that time, there were very few chemotherapies. The chemotherapies we had, as I point out in the book, are basically protein toxins. So they are not protein toxins, but small molecules that work on proteins within the cell that eventually make it toxic for the cell to continue to exist. So it's very hard with anything that's a conditional toxin to know exactly who is going to be most grievously hurt by a toxin, or who it's going to help. So I think this paves the way for using botulinus toxin in things like cosmetics.
A classic toxic protein is Botox, which is a poison, correct? And it's now used for migraine headaches and in different ways to control tremors. How can something so bad be so good?
Well, you have to understand the mechanism of Botox, which is that it goes to nerve terminals. And so if you can control it, how Botox works, if you can control the basic toxicity and make it work locally. I think that the key here is that Botox has to work locally, which is why the cosmetologist takes a syringe and puts it into different areas in your face. I've never had it done, but I understand it works marvelously for getting rid of all those wrinkles. Um, and that of course was the major use. A lot, that's what people know Botox for. In a lot of
Yes,
it's now Botox is the toxin that's produced if food spoils. So actually
yes.
the name botulinus comes from the Latin word for sausage. So, and that was the original source of botulinus poisoning. And botulinus poisoning is all over the literature, actually, if you look at it. So it's why you shouldn't eat food from a can that's swollen, because we now have remarkable canning facilities. As I point out also in the book, it's kind of hard to kill yourself with botulinus toxin nowadays because we have such great control of it. That's rather facetious, of course. One of the factors of Clostridium botulinus, so the bacteria that produces the toxin originally, is that it makes spores. And the spores can exist for hundreds of years in the soil, as we know from other examples. So there's a disease in people who shear sheep that actually is due to botulinus toxin, where you get horrible looking black scars on great black scores on your arms. That's actually much less toxic than consuming the toxin. So when you eat anything that's contaminated with these spores, or when you feed a baby, for example, raw honey, which you shouldn't do, it they get the toxin and it can penetrate the intestine and then go to your nervous system. And that's
Wow.
right. I think maybe the only current example that may be more painful than the death from botulinus toxin is tetanus toxin. It's
Mhm.
very interesting because we can take the toxin, so the detoxified extracellular proteins of tetanus, of the tetanus bacteria, and use it as a vaccine. And
Yes, we do.
the son, which the son of oh, what's his name? The president in it just before Calvin Coolidge. So Calvin
Yes.
Coolidge's son died of tetanus. And tetanus is an incredibly horrible disease. If you read the description of that disease back in the time, so when it was very common. So in the 1920s and the 1930s, we don't realize how common some of these microbial diseases were. For example, pertussis, which can
Yes.
choke a child to death. And uh, children died of all kinds of strange diseases, strange.
Well, it's interesting because regarding tetanus, all of us, even as adults, we're used to the childhood immunizations, the MMR and the uh, uh, polio vaccines and
DTaP,
all that. But
DTaP, yeah.
the right DTaP. But it's interesting because even as adults, every 10 years, we're supposed to get a tetanus shot because of the
Very good
protective
idea.
nature
You
of
do
the
not want to get
detox.
tetanus. Let me put it that way. And of course, again,
Absolutely.
tetanus is produced by a microorganism that sporulates, so it can live in the soil. So
Yes.
there isn't any way really to avoid getting a tetanus
Exposed to it, right?
toxin, getting exposed to it. So it really is important to have immunity. So, uh,
Absolutely. Let me
yeah.
move on to my third question because I want to make sure we save some time for this question. And in scanning through your book, there's you've got something in there, the Blues Brothers Guide to Nutrition, and I just want to make sure we ask for that before we run out of time today.
Okay. Well, actually, I had a lot of fun writing that, of course. Uh, there used to be a department of food and nuts at MIT. Now, of course,
Hmm.
I somehow this department with time got to accumulate a whole lot of things like biochemical engineering, which of course was what I got my master's in. That was mostly affiliated with the departments of biology and chemical engineering. Anyway, but I did at that time attend lectures from people who were looking at clinical nutrition and the importance of certain vitamins. It may become as a shock to you, but even in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't clear. And even today, we're developing new answers for what vitamins we need to take. I mean, I don't
Yes.
think anybody was talking about acetyl CoA way back in the 80s when I was a student. So anyway, the other lectures were on the basics, what people were beginning to discover about proteins. And I think the things that I'm most interested now, of course, are what makes an allergen an allergen. So this is one side of the immune system. On the other side, there is the question of, well, if this is an allergen, why is it that everybody can eat it? Why does everybody's immune system not react to allergenic proteins? Why I personally love peanut butter, and it was one of the staples of my diet when I was a graduate student. I used to live on peanut butter and jelly and peanut butter and Bacos and tomatoes and mayonnaise and lettuce on a sandwich. That was basically what I was living on, not having a whole lot of money. So this was while I was at MIT. So what I'm saying is I enjoy peanut butter, but as we know, we have a cousin Eric, and Eric will choke and potentially die
Yes.
if he's exposed to peanuts or even a related nut from walnut or cashew, as we learned to our great shock when he was a baby. And this allergy, one of the problems with allergies, and the reason why I wanted to take so much time in the book, the Blues Brothers was, by the way, a good way to sort of introduce the idea of you can get a protein, but it may not be the best protein for you. So, for example, in the Blues Brothers, uh, the big tall drink of water wants a whole loaf of bread toasted, and that's all he wants for lunch. Whereas John Belushi's character is looking for uh, is looking for two whole chickens that he's going to apparently consume himself, which is just going to make him fat. On the other hand, the protein in the chicken is certainly going to be more balanced than the protein in the loaf of bread, even though
Yes.
that you can theoretically get enough protein from a loaf of bread. It's just not going to be very balanced. And
Yes.
so that gave me a way into explaining what's funny about gluten, because gluten is really a strange protein. Uh, and again, we can eat it. As I said, I was making those sandwiches on whole wheat bread at that time, probably. I hope
Which
I
is
was
high
making
in gluten.
bread. Yeah. And I love noodles. So I can eat noodles. I can eat peanut butter. And so can 90% of the population. So this makes a problem for people who do have sensitivity to some of these proteins. So peanut allergens or gluten in the case of celiac disease, because they should not, the only real treatment for either of these diseases right now is avoidance. And avoidance is awfully hard when everybody around you is eating croissants and beautifully smelling French bread and uh, peanut butter, as I said. But you know, peanuts are in everything. If you go to a Thai restaurant, they're in the side of
Yes, they are.
your they're everywhere. And it's not just in what you can see. Peanut protein is used in a whole lot of other applications that you may or may not be aware of. It's somewhat less now, but defatted peanut protein is one of the staples of the food industry and has been for a long time. Now, Israelis say if you just feed children, I think it's called Bama, they're very addictive little protein. Well, they're covered with peanut flour, but they're actually corn puffs. So they're corn
Mhm.
puffs that are coated with peanut flour instead of cheese. So they're also vegan. And uh, again, I have to avoid these because I'm totally addicted to them. So every time I see a package, I have to say no, no, because it's really not the best food for me either, because it makes you gain weight, which was of course John's problem, John Belushi's problem in the Blues Brothers. He's a little bit on the heavy side, let's put it that way. And so people who go on, for example, a diet where they only eat protein, you know, I think it's called the caveman diet now. It had other names in
Yes, or
the
the keto
past.
diet. Yes, so it's
Yeah, the
related
keto
to that.
diet,
Yes.
ketogenic diet. This can actually be quite deadly, you know. Um,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, if you really put yourself into ketosis, you're doing what diabetics have to avoid as well. So it may help you lose weight if you do it for a short time. You should probably not do it for a long time. Anyway,
Before
the
we
chapter on the
run,
Blues Brothers was to kind of explain what the concept of how proteins are made up of amino acids and how certain amino acids have different properties than others. And for example, the amino acid proline, which occurs all over the place in glutens, is very difficult to digest because it's not one of the ones. So typical proteases in your stomach will take apart something after positively charged amino acids, but there are very few prolopeptidases. So there is now an industry to supply people who have celiac disease with a prolopeptidase. So a peptidase, a protease that will cleave after proline. But the problem with that is, well, how often do you need to take it? Because it's going to be, the prolopeptidase will be degraded in your stomach too. So
Mhm,
it's a difficult problem to deal with. Again,
I'm just
until we have better solutions for how we control the proteins in our diet, the only way that people can manage these diseases right now is through avoidance, and avoidance is very hard. If you
Well, but it's getting, but in fairness, it's getting better. I mean, I'm a big time food shopper because I'm a cook, and there are a lot of gluten-free options out there. I don't know
now
how safe they are, but yes, you can get gluten. You can get cauliflower crust pizza, for instance, which
Yes,
avoids the
which a
gluten
lot of
issue.
these so-called cauliflower crust pizzas and so forth, one of the problems with going gluten-free is you're basically going protein-free, you know?
Hmm.
And if you look at, for example, buckwheat, it you can try and get buckwheat noodles because they do contain less gluten. But if you look at the typical buckwheat noodle, it also contains wheat flour.
Yes, it does.
Well, just to hold it together. I mean, that's one of the advantages of wheat, that it's an amazing aggregation center for your bread and whatever else.
I
So
hear you. You can get more information about Dr. Schein's book, Conditionally Toxic Proteins, from the publisher, CRC Press, and of course, Amazon. This is Dr. David D. Schein. Thanks for joining me for this special edition of Saving America. Remember, a new Saving America show is aired on the Brushwood Media Network every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Listen on any of the 16 network stations, Apple or Google mobile app, Apple CarPlay, TuneIn, Smart Speaker, and all smart TVs. Find more information at the brushwoodmedianetwork.com. Please be sure to join us each week. We welcome and love your feedback from our growing audience.